Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the exciting world of chess. I am your host, George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club meets every Wednesday evening in room C-159 from 7 to 11 at the McKay Campus School at the university. And with me, once again, is my longtime colleague and trusty co-host, Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Well, Marty, today we're going to focus our attention on the 2011 United States Chess Championship. And it's coming up. It's going to be played April 13th through the 28th in St. Louis. Now, you know anything about this U.S. Championship in St. Louis?
Well, it's been in St. Louis the last few years.
Yes, it has.
And I was going to ask you, how did St. Louis happen to become the venue for the U.S. Championship? In the past, for a while, it was held in Seattle.
Yes.
For a number of years, and then before that, it was, I think, traditionally held in New York for a long time.
Oh yes, for many years, back certainly in the 60s and 70s, yes.
Right. So how did St. Louis, they have a brand new chess center there?
You've hit the nail on the head.
Right.
The St. Louis Chess Club, the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis, the St. Louis Chess Club is now the premier chess club in the country. And it was created thanks to the generous contribution donations of a multimillionaire. His name is Rex Sinkfield, and he made it possible that St. Louis now has the state-of-the-art chess club in the country. I mean, it outshines anything you'll see in New York or Chicago, Los Angeles, and he also has the money as a multimillionaire. He has actually increased the prize fund of this U.S. Championship.
Now, has he attracted top players to move to
Yes.
the St. Louis area? Because New York, California, even the Boston area have traditionally been the centers of chess activity.
Yes, well, Hikaru Nakamura, the #1 player in the country, actually is taken up St. Louis as his official residence. Okay. Another grandmaster, Ben Feingold, has moved from Michigan to St. Louis. So yes, he's attracted players to move to St. Louis because it is really a beautiful club. Huh. Now, if people were to go to, they have a website. You know, if you go,
do we have their?
We have their web address. If one were to actually go to stlouischessclub.org, you would find everything they're doing.
There's a photo gallery, list of events,
there's
games.
videos, there's news, there's schedule of their events. Here's their web page. This is actually the #1 club, and any serious chess club, any chess player should visit this website. Mm-hmm.
So this is now the home of the U.S. Championship.
Yes, it is.
And how many rounds and how many players?
All right, well, let's talk about briefly, before we get into the game we're going to present. Right. The U.S. Championship this year has a new format. We have 16 players. Actually, this is probably the strongest U.S. Championship in ages, because we have 16 players that are they're divided into 2 8-player round-robin sections, and among those 16 players, we have 3 strong players from Massachusetts. Let's talk about our Massachusetts Masters.
All right, our contingent that's going.
Our contingent. Well, let's start actually with the #1 player in Massachusetts. His name is Larry Christensen. Okay. We have some photos of Larry Christensen, who lives in Cambridge.
Now, he's a former U.S. champion. He's won 3 times.
He's won it 3 times. He won it actually in 1980 and 1983. He was co-champion those 2 years.
Right.
And then he won it outright.
20 years later, he won it in 2002.
2002, he was the champion. So he's won it 3 times. Larry Christensen, again, his wife, he's married to Natasha Christensen, who's very active at the Boylston Chess Club in Somerville. So Larry, his current ranking in the country is 10th, you know. But again, he's 54 years old. He'll turn 55 in a couple of months. But he is one of the strongest players in the country, definitely. So another player from Massachusetts is Alexander Ivanov, who is probably one of the most active grandmasters in the country. Well, here's a picture of the defending champion, Gadakamsky. Let's talk about Gadakamsky. This is the defending champion who defected to the United States. He was actually born in Siberia, came when he was, I think, 14 or 15, It was in 1989. He won the U.S. Championship 2 years after he defected with his father, 1991, and he's back in St. Louis defending his championship that he won last year. So that's Gadakomsky. But getting back to Alexander Ivanov, who lives in Newton, he has actually been U.S. champion. Here is Alexander Ivanov at the board. He was co-champion, U.S. co-champion in 1995. So he's only done this once. But again, if you take all the grandmasters in the country, he is probably the most active among all the grandmasters.
He's in all the tournaments. Larry Christensen, to go back, he hasn't played. He doesn't play in as many tournaments these days.
He's not as active as...
He teaches, I understand, and coaches.
He's a teacher, yes, right. He has a number of students that come to his place, you know, in Cambridge, Now let's talk about actually our third player from Massachusetts, who's not a Massachusetts native, but he certainly has roots, has actually connections to Massachusetts because he is a student at Brandeis University. His name is Sam Shanklin.
Okay.
Now, if we have a photo of Sam Shanklin, there's Sam.
Oh, yeah.
And Sam is going to be, is not yet an international grandmaster. He's an international master, but the World Chess Federation is going to award him sometime this year the title of international grandmaster because he has qualified. He's got enough what they call norms.
Norms, right.
Three. All you need is three what they call norms, and he accomplished that.
Right. And just to explain it, you don't automatically become a grandmaster by reaching a certain rating.
No,
you have to have it. Your norm is a result that you get in a certain strength tournament.
Exactly, right.
Okay.
Now let's talk about somebody who has a Fitchburg connection, and that's actually Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan. Now, do we have a photo of Yasser Seirawan? There's Yasser. Now, Yasser is, let's see, how old is Yasser? He just celebrated a week ago his 51st birthday. Now, Yasser was here in Fitchburg in 1984. He gave a simultaneous exhibition at the St. Joseph Club in Cleghorn. That's where the Wachusett Chess Club was meeting then. And he is really one of this country's shining stars. And Yasser has won the U.S. Championship 4 times. He was co-champion in 1981, 1989, and 2000, but then he was outright champion in 1986. So he's one to root for. I'm certainly rooting for Yasser because he's one of the oldest participants there. Now, who else do we have here? I think we've actually covered all the players here as far as the Massachusetts Masters: Larry Christensen, Alexander Ivanov, Sam Shanklin, Yasser Seirawan, and we've shown the photo of Gadakomsky. Right. Now, the game we're going to present to our viewers today is a game that Larry Christensen played in 1977, which, by the way, was the year he was awarded the Grandmaster title by the World Chess Federation. And it was played against a strong master by the name of Eugene Meyer. And Eugene Meyer grew up in New York. In fact, his father is very famous. Frank Meyer was the founding co-editor of National Review magazine. You know Bill Buckley's magazine?
Yeah.
Well, his father was a confidant and an advisor to Bill Buckley. So that's Eugene Meyer's famous father. But Eugene Meyer, this was played in Lone Pine, California, in an international tournament that was held. In Lone Pine, California, they held tournaments from 1971 to 1981. There was a millionaire then who put up the prize money. His name was Louis Statham. He was a millionaire, an inventor of medical instruments. So this is a game from 1977. I hope our viewers will enjoy this. We certainly did.
Sure.
And let's start this game. Larry Christensen was white. What did he play as his first move?
Larry Christensen chose to move his E2 pawn to E4. One of the most common openings there is, a good strong opening. It opens up the bishop file and the diagonal and the queen diagonal, puts a pawn in the center. We've seen it many times.
Yes. All right. So what Eugene Meyer played on his first move, he played C5. He played the pawn C7 to C5. Now, what is this defense known as?
Well, it's called the Sicilian defense. It's one of the oldest defenses in modern chess.
Okay.
It's called the Sicilian defense because it was commonly played by players in Italy in the Sicilian area back in the 15 and 1600s.
Yes, it was, right? This goes back.
It goes back, way back.
Way back, 400 years at least, yes. Okay.
So white has a number of approaches. Black is sort of staking out the queen side. White is staking out the middle. Black could develop his queen knight to c3. That would lead to one that's called a closed variation.
Right.
He could play the pawn to c3, intending to push the pawn to queen 4. There are a number of things that what Christensen chose was by far, by a factor of 10 to 1, the most common second move for white. He played the knight on g1 to f3. It develops the knight, but it also attacks the d4 square, preparing the pawn push from d2 to d4.
All right, so it's Meyer's second move, and he has choices here. A good move for black here could be knight c6. That's good. Another good move, which Bobby Fischer favored, was playing the pawn on d7 to d6. That's a good move. But what Meyer played was an equally good move, e6. So that looks good. That's an acceptable third move or second move for black here. What did Christensen do now?
Christensen is good. White is going to follow through with his plan. His idea when he played knight to f3, the idea was to play the pawn to d4, which is exactly what he does. He takes the pawn on d2 and plays it to d4, occupying the center, in a way attacking the c5 pawn.
Which is defended.
It's defended.
All right. So, all right, but there's also a threat here. If black does not capture this pawn, this d pawn with the c pawn,
right.
I see this pawn being advanced to d5,
right.
and actually restricting black's space here. Right. So what is normally played and actually recommended is for black to play c takes.
Right. There's
d4.
not a good alternative.
No, there isn't. There is no other good move here, and this is the most commonly played response: is c takes d4.
Right.
All right, so that's what he played. All right, so what did Christensen do?
Well, he's going to recapture the pawn. He could recapture with the queen. He could take the pawn, but then if he takes with the queen, it could easily be chased away.
Yes, the knight c6 would attack the queen.
And has to move with the tempo, so
right.
we call
he
it.
would lose time.
Right,
White would lose time. All right, so
he recaptures with the knight. It centralizes the knight. He's got the pawn in the center. It's a good, strong move.
Okay. All right, so now, what does black do here? Well, black still has some good moves here. Could still play knight c6 is good. Also, knight f6 coming out to attack the e-pawn is also a good move. But what he played here is a move. You'll have to tell me what is the idea behind this move? A6.
Right.
In fact, don't you play this?
I have played it. I
Yes.
played it frequently.
All right, so what is this?
Well, it sometimes goes by the name of the Paulson variation or the Kahn variation, based on the players who made it famous. As I said earlier, one of black's strategic ideas is to try to create space and create play on the queen side of the board. This a6 move prepares the b5, the pawn to go to b5,
I see.
which opens up a lot of space on the queen side, prepares b7 for a good square for the bishop,
Okay.
and so on.
All right.
So white's task is to really try not to let black do that. White in the Sicilian often tries to mount a kingside attack. That's white's strategy. What white could do, he could simply develop a knight onto c3. That gets the piece out.
Yes.
Another common move is to play the pawn on c2 to c4, which is called a Maroczy bind. We'll see this later, but this really restricts black's movement.
It stops actually black from playing b5.
Right.
Yes.
So
okay.
we'll see that later. The other possibility, and what Christensen did, was a little bit more rare. He plays the bishop on f1 to d3, which at first glance looks a little odd because he's putting a bishop behind the pawn that's not being attacked, but it does prepare white to castle. It develops the bishop, and it's a useful diagonal for the bishop to be on.
Okay. Well, I see that white is ahead in development. He's already had two pieces developed, ready to castle, and black has not developed a single piece.
Right.
So what Meyer did here on his fifth move was play knight f6. He's at least getting a knight out, attacking a pawn which you say is
already
defended.
protected.
Okay.
So, but because that pawn is already defended, that frees up Christensen to continue with his plan of castling, which is what he does.
Okay. All right. So now, what does black do here? Meyer now has choices here. He could have actually still brought out the knight to c6. That was always available to him. Nothing wrong with that. But what he played instead was a very flexible move, which you'll see very commonly in the Sicilian defense, playing the queen to c7. Yeah. So he plays the queen to c7, stops the bishop from getting to the F4 square.
It also occupies an important file.
Right. Okay.
And
So now it's Christensen's move.
Well, White has a number of options. He could play a bishop to E3. He could develop the knight to C3. There are lots of possibilities, all of which have been played. But Christensen goes back to this idea of playing what we call the Maroczy bind. He plays his pawn on C2 to C4. Really restricts Black's movements now on the queen side. He can play the desired B5 because White can simply take it.
Right. I mean, White has total control of this B5 square,
Right.
stopping any pawn advance to B5.
Right.
All right, so what Eugene Meyer played, that's his seventh move coming up, he played D6.
Right.
He advances this pawn from D7 to D6. Certainly now it vacates this D7 square either for the bishop or the knight possibly to go
He
there.
wouldn't want to play to D5 because
No.
that would open his king up to an attack.
Yes, it would actually,
the king is still in the middle.
the E file would be open, very dangerous.
The rooks are, the king is
so,
outside.
yes, so
That's
it's
why,
not-
so he needs the space, but he can't come all the way to D5, which
All right.
is the strength of the C4.
Okay, so what
well, Christensen is going to continue now with his development. Now he plays the knight on bishop 1 to C3. It's behind this pawn. It now occupies a really strong place here.
All right, so now it's Black's eighth move. Now Black has got to develop, still keep on developing pieces. Now he could have played the bishop here from F8 to E7, but he wants to actually put a bishop in a more active, play a more active role. He plays G6. What you see with the idea of playing this bishop to G7, which is known as a fianchetto or fianchetto. So he plays G6. So what does Christensen do against that?
Well, again, White has a number of options. He could probably try to play something like F4, start a kingside attack. He could develop a bishop here or here. There's lots of things he can do. What Christensen does is a little bit of a rare move, but by playing G6, he's now taken any kind of protection away from that knight on F6. So he plays the bishop to G5. Something has to be done about the threat to the knight.
Knight has to be protected.
Right.
All right. So what Eugene Meyer played was play bishop G7 and defend the knight on F6.
Right.
Okay, so what does Christensen do now?
Well, when you're looking at the board like this, you're saying, well, how can I, the White has a lead in development. He has a lead in space. A player with that kind of lead needs to keep building up the pressure. While Black is struggling to get his pieces out, White needs to take advantage of that time to find ways to build up the pressure. So he could have done a number of things. He could have played the queen to E2. He could have played the rook to E1, things like that. He played the rook on A1 to C1, which puts the rook on the same file as the queen, so that in case things open up, the queen could be exposed to an attack.
All right. Okay, so now Black could, in this position, castle. Nothing wrong with castling here. But he chooses to add further defense of this knight on F6 and plays the knight on B8 to D7. So knight B D7 is his move on the ninth move, or actually 10th move. This is already the 10th move.
Right. So now the White's in a funny situation. All his pieces are in good places, and yet there's not a lot that he can do right away. He wants to see just exactly what kind of a setup Black wants to go for. So I agree with when we went over this game earlier, you said White played the king from G1 to H1. We were wondering why did he do that, and I agree with your assessment that this is probably a wait and see move.
Yes,
he wants to see which way Black's going to put his pieces, so that'll determine what he does with his attack next.
So it's a very convenient waiting move.
Just,
it's saying,
gets the king a little bit out of the way.
Right. And it gives him time to do that because he's waiting for Black to, show his cards.
Right.
Okay, so what Eugene Meyer played here was he castled. Now it's time to castle.
Right.
So that was his 11th move.
Right.
All right. So
now he's castling. Now the plan is clear. He plays the queen on D1 to D2, puts the queen and the bishop on the same diagonal. The idea is to get the bishop to H6, trade off that G7 bishop, and start his attack.
Ooh, yes. And that is actually very thematic.
Right. Against the fianchettoed position.
Against the fianchetto, you would want to always try to eliminate your opponent's,
That's going to be a strong bishop.
Yes, right. All right. So what Eugene Meyer played here, he plays knight G4. Now, what are the threats now?
Well, now he's opened up an attack on the knight on d4 from the bishop. He's opened up that diagonal.
Bishop is attacking the bishop attacking the knight on d4. Okay. All right. So what does Christensen do here?
Well, he's gonna he's gonna come back, and he's not gonna he wants to be careful. He's gonna play the bishop back to e2, which simultaneously attacks that knight on g4, and by moving opens up the queen as a defender for the knight.
Okay. Now, here is actually a turning point or a key point in the game. What does black do here? Does black now, under attack, this knight under attack, does he retreat, go back to where he came from, knight f6, or does he play the knight to e5 with a threat on the c pawn? He has a double attack on the c pawn. Of course, that could be defended easily. What he chooses to do, instead of actually retreating or relocating the knight to e5, he plays queen c5. Now, what's going on here?
Well, this is where white has to be very careful. He could, if he wanted to, say come back and attack the queen on b3. The knight would be safe, you know, but this is the key point in this. This is what he can't do.
Tell our viewers what would happen if that knight went back to b3.
Looks like he's got to threaten the queen.
Exactly.
But this pawn has a check.
Well, let's. Okay, so you mean the knight takes f2 check,
right?
And the rook is, if the rook takes the knight, the white is giving up what we call the exchange, giving a stronger piece for a weaker piece.
Right.
So that would force the king to move to g1.
Right.
On the check.
Right. Well, so the king goes to g1.
Okay, and now this game will be over very quickly.
If it was played.
If it ever played, it wasn't played. But now we have knight h3. Double check.
So the king has to move. There's no blocking.
The king has to move back to h1.
Right.
And now here's the surprising move, which every beginner should certainly learn, is queen g1 check.
Right. The king cannot take.
King cannot take because the knight
the rook has to.
The knight has to take it, and now we have knight f2 checkmate. What is this called?
Smothered mate.
Smothered mate. Smothered checkmate. Okay. And anyone who plays chess should learn about smothered checkmates. All right, so the knight is here, the queen is on c5. So that is what's wrong with knight b3 attacking the queen, because white will just will either lose the exchange or get mated, smothered.
So to eliminate that problem and to stay even, Christensen exchanges the knight. He plays bishop take knight here.
Okay, bishop takes g4. Well, what Meyer did was play bishop takes d4 here. All right, so we've had these exchanges.
Right.
All right, so now what are we doing?
Okay, now he's going to take the knight on c3, play it to a4, threatening the queen, forcing the queen to move. And the queen has only a limited number of places it can go because it has to maintain the protection on the bishop.
Right, exactly. Well, it chooses to go back here, queen a7, and still protect the bishop on d4. Okay.
So then he's going to take he's going to start, his attack is underway. He's going to keep mounting the pressure. He's going to move his rook on c1 to d1, adding another attacker against the bishop.
All right. Now, this if he moves the bishop to e5, protecting the pawn on d6, there's something wrong with this move.
Well, he could just play here.
Right. The f4 would attack the bishop, force the bishop to leave the defense of this d pawn, and white would win this d pawn, a very valuable d pawn. So what Eugene Meyer chose to do was play e5 and protect the bishop.
Okay.
All right. So now it's defended.
Now the bishop that was back here, these now have become really weak squares. Those dark squares by the king, and white really wants to put the bishop onto f6 so that the queen can come down to h6, threatening mate on the next move. But that square is defended by the knight. So what he do is he eliminates the defender. He takes the bishop on g4, takes the knight on d7, eliminating the f6 defender.
Very good move. Okay, so what Meyer plays is bishop takes d7.
Right.
So he has to.
Opens the way for bishop to f6. All right. Threatening queen in two moves. Threatening mate in two moves.
So this is the major. If this queen ever gets to h6, it's all over.
Right.
All right. So there's only one way to stop that queen ever getting to h6.
Right.
And Meyer has to play it.
Right.
He has to play bishop e3.
Yeah. Now it looks like he's giving up the bishop, but in terms of material, the knight over here is attacked.
The bishop on d7 is attacking the undefended knight.
So
on
he could afford, in terms of material, he could afford to do this. So he's not going to offer a queen trade because
No.
his attack would just run out of steam.
Exactly.
So he's going to take with the pawn. F takes on E3.
All right, and Meyer just continued with bishop takes the knight on A4. Bishop takes A4,
It's
attacks the rook.
Attacks the rook. The rook's in a good place, so he doesn't
Okay.
want to move it. He just blocks the attack with his pawn. He plays the
B3.
B2 to B3.
Okay, so now the
Threatens
bishop has to,
go back.
has to retreat,
Right.
but it goes back to C6. Bishop C6 attacks this undefended pawn on E4.
Right.
All right.
So now the queen wants to get to H6. This is where the mate has to take place, down around there.
Right.
So now he could play the queen to F2, but he wants to be able to keep this rook mobile. So he's going to bring it back to E1.
Yes.
Enables him to get to the H4 square, which it will enable the future attack.
All right.
So he plays queen to E1.
All right. So black has to give himself some air, or a chess term we use is luft. Has to give himself some luft, and he plays H6, which allows him a vacant square for this king to go to H7. All right. So now
Okay,
what
so,
does
so
Christian
now
do?
that the H6 square is occupied for the moment,
Yes.
he still wants to get his queen to F4 because it could still lead to mate.
But he can't do it.
He can't leave this pawn on E3 cannot be left undefended because that will allow the queen to take it
And defend
come
this
back
pawn.
to defend.
Right,
So
okay.
this was the reason for the queen coming back to E1 because now he plays the rook on F1 to F3, which defends the pawn and brings the rook into an attacking position.
Okay. All right. So now this is the threat. Yeah, white has an overwhelming threat of queen H4. So what? And he also look at this.
He's
This
got
rook,
that.
The rook is actually attacking this undefended pawn on
right.
D6.
Anytime he wants it.
So what Eugene Meyer played here, with this rook on, which has not moved at all
Right.
the entire game, the rook on A8 moves to D8. He's actually offering the exchange.
yeah, right.
Because if he can get rid of this bishop here,
the attack is
he's
held off.
yeah, right. He's actually staved off the attack
Right.
by you're eliminating this bishop.
Yeah,
but
Christensen's not going to. He's going to continue the
he's
attack.
He's too smart.
Yeah, he goes. The queen goes to H4 where to continue the attack.
All right, so now we have the attack on this pawn. He's got a double attack on this rook here. So what Meyer plays is king H7. So he comes up and defends. He defends the pawn now.
Does he play king H7?
I'm sorry.
No, he played H5.
No, I'm sorry. He played H5.
Right.
Oh, that stops the queen from taking that pawn.
Right.
That's true. H5
Yeah,
was the
right.
move he played.
Stops it for the moment. So now, what Christensen does is he plays a curious-looking rook to F5. It looks like is he giving up the rook? But
that rook cannot be taken.
Can't be taken because it
it
leads
allowed
to
it-
mate.
you're right.
No, it leads to mate with check and then mate.
Yes, right. Actually, with the queen check
Right.
on the G file. All right. So, but what Eugene Meyer plays here now, he realizes he has to come to the help. He has to help his
Right.
king. He plays queen takes E3, the pawn E3.
Right.
So at least he's able to
Come back
into play here on the
Right.
king side.
But it's too late.
It's too late now.
Right, because the queen can simply play queen takes H5,
Ooh.
threatening mate on H8.
Well, how do we stop that? We have to accept the queen. We have to accept the sacrifice of the queen by taking G takes H5, which he
Right.
did. It was played in the game.
Right, and then now the rook takes H5, and the mate threat is renewed.
And because of that,
Game's
Eugene
over.
Meyer resigned.
Right.
This is the 26th move coming up, or for him, he didn't want to face checkmate, so he gave up. Well, this was an interesting game from 1977. And this was a week before Larry Christensen's 21st birthday. Now, I'd like to tell our viewers, we should tell our viewers that we got a major tournament coming to Leominster, April 17th. It's a Sunday at the Sheraton 4 Points. It's a tournament sponsored by the Massachusetts Chess Association. If anyone would go to the website masschess.org, you would get details on this great tournament that's going to be held at the Sheraton 4 Points. But we hope you join us next time for another edition of Chess Chat. We'll present to you a very interesting game.